Hello and welcome to Mediumship Matters with me, Hannah McIntyre. How are you doing? Now, this episode is the somewhat long overdue Spirit Stories special that I was really excited about, and I'm going to be honest with you guys and say has not panned out the way that I expected it to at all. Now, isn't it interesting how some things just don't align for you? So I had quite a few people contact me and want to be involved in this podcast with some really incredible stories, and then most of them just fell away. And I think there's still a lot of resistance for people in coming out of the spiritual closet and letting people know their truth. I think there are more believers than there have ever been, but they're still feeling that shame and slight embarrassment of being judged. And as you will know, I was talking last week about when I went to Glastonbury, and it's so funny, isn't it? Because I'm spiritual. I know I'm spiritual. Of course I'm spiritual. But then I also find some people wear their spirituality like a facade. And I think I mentioned some people doing some incredibly odd things. But one of the oddest moments in the whole of Glastonbury was at Chalice Well, which I've always wanted to go to. Couldn't wait to go. And as we walked up, it's on a slope, Chalice Well. As we walked up to the top, at the fountain where you can fill up your water bottles and take some of the water of Chalice Well home, there was a couple sat by the fountain, and we saw it, and the spout, I don't know what you'd call it, it's not really a fountain. The water comes out of the lion's mouth, that kind of thing. And they had brought loads of crystals and put them all in the fountain. And we went, okay, they're doing something with it. We'll go up to the top, mooch around, and then come back. So we went up to the top and we looked in the well opening and we waited our turn because we're good British people. And that's what British people do. We queue and we wait, somewhat impatiently, but we wait. And we waited for the priestesses who were doing their different things, and we let them all do that, and we waited and we waited, and then we went back down, and that couple was still at the lion's mouth, and they were just completely hogging it, and they were still there, and people were waiting and queuing up. And then this guy came along, and he had a feather with him, and he started standing on one leg and waving that feather around in a really ornate fashion and very show-offy. And I just thought, this is what people expect when they think of spiritual. They think of people hogging a space that's meant for everybody because they decided that their need is more spiritual and greater than everybody else's, whilst taking something that is very beautiful and then putting their stuff in it, even though it's a thing that's meant for everybody. We couldn't take photos of it because they had filled it with their stuff. And then we've also got this guy doing his thing, and I just thought, this is what other people think of when I tell them what I do for a living. And it was quite eye-opening, because I'm all about ceremony and being with spirit and finding your own way of honouring your spirit and communicating with the spirit world in whatever way works for you. What I'm not about is doing it as a piece of performance art for every person to see because you want to show off how spiritual you are by waving around a feather and standing on one leg, or by jamming all your crystals into a shared space and hogging it for 15 minutes with your eyes shut chanting. And the reason why I say this is because I think we still, as a spiritual community, have a long way to go. Now, if you want to sit in the energy of Chalice Well, then do that. But there's plenty of quiet little spaces that you can go to where you can absorb the energy and sit out of the way. You do not need to be rocking and chanting in the centre of the space so that everybody can see you, that's not really communing with spirit. That's showing off. And that's coming from somebody that likes to be on the stage. So yeah, just a really fascinating thing. And so the reason why I've gone off on this tangent, and kind of makes sense to me, but probably doesn't to you, dear listener, but you're always on this roller coaster with me, aren't you? Is that I think for a lot of people, we resist others tarring us with that brush. And that can cause problems. And part of our work, I do think, as modern mediums and modern light workers, is to keep the woo in woo-woo, but not make it so woo-woo that people don't want to be a part of it. We have to make it accessible. We have to show that you can commune with spirit and be normal. And stripping off naked in a public place and bending over, the sights I saw in Glastonbury, people, and jumping into a water source and whooping, I mean, it's fun, and if that's what you want to do, do it, but don't tell yourself it's a spiritual pilgrimage. I don't know, maybe I'm a prude. But, you know, some sights you can never unsee once you've seen them, and that gentleman bending over and making a loud noise as he did, so everybody did look at his butthole and ballsack, I don't feel was necessary. You're welcome. Anyway, I digress. So that's why I think we've had some trouble with spirit stories, because I had over 15 people that wanted to share their stories, and all I can share with you today are 2. I kid you not. So if you have got a story or an experience that you would like to share, you can send it on WhatsApp to the WhatsApp in the show notes, or you can send it by email and we'll pop it out there. You don't have to be interviewed by me. Just tell us your story, because I think that's such a gift. In sharing your experience, you can help other people that have had the same experience, and we can all learn all the different ways that everybody experiences spirit together, rather than this kind of isolated solo adventures. So please do consider sending your messages in. So Laura's been in contact and she wrote me an email, so I'm going to read it to you. I don't feel confident to come on a podcast. However, others may find my experience interesting, and I'm happy for you to tell it if you would like to. I used to work as a care assistant on a night shift, and at the time wasn't too interested in spirituality, and I believe this experience is what started me on my journey of questioning life and death. We had recently had a resident pass away, and builders during the day were working in this particular room to redecorate it and get it ready for a new resident to move in. I had come on for my night shift, and when it got to 3 a.m, myself and another care assistant would do checks where we would go into every occupied room to check the resident was settled and safely in bed. We were halfway round when we heard this really loud music being played on vinyl. It started off scratchy, like when vinyl starts to play, until this slow dance song started to play so clearly. It was so loud we could hear it in the corridor, and I started to do a little slow dance as it was truly a beautiful old song. My colleague burst my little bubble by saying, "Laura, it's 3 a.m. This should not be happening, and who is playing it?" I then came to my senses and back to the present moment of my colleague is right, it's 3 a.m. and this will wake our other residents. So we rushed to the room where it is coming from, the room the builders are working in. We both said, "How is this possible? Nobody's occupying this room." We try to open the door and it's locked. So we find the nurse on shift who has the master key. 3 of us standing at the door, looking at each other. The nurse unlocks the door, and as we push it open, the music dies down and it's as if nothing has happened. The window was open a tiny bit, and there was a radio on the shelf playing, but very, very low volume. You couldn't hear it with the door shut, and it was just on Kiss FM, a modern station. We all just stood in the middle of the room looking at each other in shock, and the nurse said to us 2 care assistants not to mention this to anybody, as we were seen to be crazy and nobody would believe us, so it's best to keep it to ourselves. Still to this day, I cannot explain this experience, and I will never forget how that lovely song played out. Whilst working there, I did have further experiences, but nothing quite like that night. I am so glad that you were brave enough to share that story with us all, Laura, because that is magnificent. What a tale. What an experience. And in my take, it is that lovely person that has moved into spirit, just letting you know that they're okay. And what a wonderful way to do it. Magic. I love it. So thank you for sharing. Next up, I've got a chat that I recorded with Brooke. Now, poor Brooke recorded this with me eons ago, and because I was waiting for other people to book their appointments and tell their stories and get back to me, I haven't shared it yet, but I've finally just drawn a line in the sand. So here is Brooke's story. Hi, Brooke. Thank you very much for coming on to the podcast to share your spirit story. So where would you like to begin with it?
Yeah, I guess I can begin by saying where my spiritual awakening started, which was quite a bit before my kind of big story, just as a bit of a, prelude to it.
Excellent. Good.
So around 2010, so I was 18, 19 around that time. I guess side note, I grew up quite religious, so I had no interest or knowledge about spiritual stuff. And a family friend sort of got into psychic and medium readings, and she was quite good. So at one point we went to her, my mom and I, and had a reading, and it blew my mind, it blew my mom's mind, but we still were pretty like nervous of it. We were like, okay, this either is fake or it's evil, we weren't even religious anymore, but that's just kind of the background we had.
Okay, yeah, get that.
Yeah. And she said to me, you're gonna have this really big in your life later. Like you can see spirits, right? And I was like, I absolutely cannot. I've never seen anything. I have no idea what you're talking about. And she was like, yeah, you will though. And she was very sure about it. And I was like, that was weird. And then kind of in the next year after that, I just had things here and there, which was I went into a crystal shop and I almost fainted. I just really reacted to the energies of them, and I was like, well, that was weird. I didn't know that was a real thing. And so I started meditating at that point, and it ended up progressing. Like I was quite good at moving energy once I discovered my sensitivity to it. And I ended up having like out of body experiences and sort of big experiences like that. So I was quite into it. This all happened quite quickly. And then I met my husband. We started dating, and he was like a very dominant personality, not in a bad way. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but he was just like, he'll convince you of anything kind of personality. And he was very, very opinionated in science. So when I told him kind of a little bit about what I was experiencing or aware of, he shut it down pretty strongly and was like, come on, like, you know how strong our brains are. You're just imagining that. Like, of course you can imagine it. Our brains are amazing. And I was like, you know what? That makes sense. You're right. So I completely didn't believe in it and shut it down for the 11 years we were together. So yeah, for about a decade, I was just completely unaware of that whole side of the world and not experiencing anything either. So when we were together about like 10 and a half years, he got quite sick. And that was not on my radar, although it should have been. He had cancer as a child, and the chemo ruined his heart. So he had a heart transplant before I met him. So by this point, his heart was 17 years old. And it started rejecting out of nowhere, which is common, but I didn't realize it at the time. And yeah, so that kind of hit out of nowhere. Like
Yeah.
one day he was shoveling our driveway, and the next minute he was in the hospital for 6 weeks. So it was very like out of nowhere. And I was a full-time working parent, and he was a stay-at-home parent. So I was very, very focused on my career. And he handled our 2-year-old and the house while I was doing that.
Yeah.
So once he got sick, I was now worried about him, obviously, but also having to take on his responsibilities and mine. So I was getting quite stressed, obviously,
Yeah, of course.
and exhausted. And then one night, and again, he's sick, but I didn't think it was a concern.
Mhm.
I was just like, oh, we'll just go figure it out. I
Yeah.
didn't have on my radar that it was a big deal because I was in denial, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So one night, it was more like in the morning, like early morning, 5 a.m. type thing. I was in a very highly stressed, exhausted mental state. And I opened my eyes, and there was a apparition standing in my room, and it jolted me awake. I was like, okay, I'm seeing this. That is a full-blown person standing in like across the room from me. And I just stared at it and it was funny because I had never seen that before.
Yeah.
And it was like I felt her energy, but she didn't move. And it was interesting because it was like an image that was like you could see it wasn't just a photo, but at the same time it didn't move. Like its face was a projection and it didn't move. But anyways, I know you know what I mean. But to me,
Yeah.
I was like, this is something I've never seen before. It's not a dream. And I'm awake. And she was an old woman hooked up to a hospital bed with IVs and stuff, but she was smiling at me and giving me this really strong sense of peace, which was nice because she didn't freak me out.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was like, okay, that just happened, and then she disappeared. I told Jamie about it, and that's my husband, sorry, and he was just like, okay, you're stressed. How about I set you up with my psychologist? And, which isn't a bad thing, but it's also like, no, there's also something else happening here.
Mm-hmm.
About a week later, I saw another apparition, same thing when I'm just sort of early in the morning. And this one scared me. I woke up and I have like an open closet in my room. So it's like a dark closet look.
Yeah.
And I saw something stirring. So I sat up and focused on it. And from this like black shadow on the floor, this man crawled out, made eye contact with me, and crawled at me.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I yelled up and I was like, what the fuck? And
Yeah.
started screaming. And I woke Jamie up and he was like, oh my God, like, you're having nightmares. Like, are you okay? And that one made me so frightened because I was like, okay, I'm really seeing spirits.
Yeah.
And that one, I don't know what that was about. Like, I don't know if he was negative or if it was, I just didn't understand it, but it freaked me out so severely that I wasn't sleeping now. I was too scared to go to sleep. I
Yeah.
thought I was going to see things. And I did. I saw a third one. And the funny thing is, this one wasn't human. It looked like a statue that was alive, a golden face.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't make me feel negative, but I was like, okay, that one's different than the other ones. Yeah, so after seeing those three,
Yeah, like you do.
yeah, that only heightened my stress, so I was quite overwhelmed. But I started looking for information and, Googling all these different things. I ended up finding your podcast, and like pretty quickly, I just put in medium, and it was the first one that popped up. So I listened to it and listened to the whole thing. This is about 2021, so I think there was a whole season in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I listened to it all immediately. Like I just needed to absorb the information, but it really, really helped because you had some episodes about fear and how like we generated ourselves and how it basically creates what we're seeing. Like, and that helped me so much. Like I needed that episode.
Good.
And then because I was so overwhelmed, I just felt like I need to start meditating again. I haven't meditated in a very, like, many, many years.
Uh-huh.
So I started meditating every night. And there was one meditation where I really melted. I really, like, it was really working. And I opened my eyes at the end of it, and the clouds were shaped. There's one cloud shaped perfectly like a pendulum, or a specific pendulum that I own, so I recognized it.
Mm-hmm.
And and I was like, that looks exactly like a pendulum, weird. And then I looked to one side of it, and there's a cloud perfectly shaped like a bird of prey. And I was like, oh, is that a hawk? And then my eyes darted kind of involuntarily to the other side of the sky, and there was a cloud perfectly shaped like an owl, like its face, so you know it's an owl.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, that's funny. It's like they just answered me that no, it's not a hawk, it's an owl. Like,
Amazing.
immediately. So then, I Googled what's the symbolism of an owl, and it said, either wisdom, but the main one that pointed out to me was death. And I was like, oh, that's kind of
Mm.
creepy. Like, I don't like, is that just the end of a cycle, or is that literal? I don't know. The next morning, because I had started following you,
Yeah.
I saw your advertisement for your pendulum course. And I was like, that's so funny. Like, they obviously want me to take it.
Yeah.
And I did. And it was really helpful because one of the things, and I still struggle with this, but I'm getting better with it, is I receive messages and I can see spirits with me and trying to talk to me, but I don't know what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have a hard time interpreting the message. So I feel like that's why they sent me to your pendulum course, to at least help a bit.
Yes or a no, or yeah, some specifics in there. Love it.
Yeah. Um, and then there was a funny thing. There was a couple instances where spirit came physically, not just energetically. I think the clouds are sort of physical too, but
Mm-hmm.
there's one day where I had let my little dog out to go to the washroom outside, and she is small. She's a Chihuahua pug Frenchie, so she's like this miniature little Frenchie.
Lovely.
And she's always chased birds, but she's never caught one. She's never done anything violent. She's like a little cuddle bug. And she never came in as quickly, so I went outside to check on her. And she was on my deck with a bird. And it was a little golden finch, a beautiful little bird. And she killed it. And she was acting totally feral. Like, I've never seen her act like that. And I was like, what? Oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you did this. I put her inside, and this bird that she had killed there's no blood around. Like, I'm sure she licked it up, but there was no carnage. There was just this bird lying there, and it had a perfect little incision on its chest, and its heart had been pulled out and put beside it. So I was like, okay, my dog is psycho. That's
Mm-hmm.
terrifying that she just like went in and gently removed its heart.
Yeah.
I'm sure she thought it was the squeaker, right? But
Yeah, for sure.
kind of later, I realized I think that was a symbol from spirit showing that, my husband was about to have a heart surgery.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time. I realized this about 6 months after the fact.
Ah.
It just kind of clicked 6 months later. I was like, whoa, like they showed me that physically. So that was another kind of
Yeah.
big jolt. And then kind of the last thing before his surgery that they did for me was I was quite overwhelmed trying to hold everything together with how
Of
busy I
course.
was. And I found myself impatient with him. Like, he would, at the end of the day, he'd be like, oh, do you want to watch a movie? And I'd be like, I am exhausted. I literally can't hang out with you. Sorry. Or, I need you to watch our son while I have a meeting, and get frustrated that he was still sleeping. He was sleeping because he was in heart failure. But so I woke up, well, I was half asleep, and I had this booming voice, which I'd never had an audible experience with them before, come to me, and they said, you have 4 weeks left with Jamie. And I was like, completely, well, it certainly shocked me, but I also was like, that wasn't real. That was a dream. And he ended up getting a phone call for a new heart exactly 4 weeks to the day from that moment. So now
Wow.
I know that was obviously my guides warning me, like, be more patient, like, you're going to regret it if you don't slow down in these next 4 weeks. Luckily, I did listen to them,
Hmm.
despite me not really believing what was
Funny how
happening.
that works. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so then we rushed to the bigger city that's nearby, about a 4-hour drive for his heart transplant. And as I was checking him into the hospital, it's a downtown hospital, the night before, again, totally thinking this is going to be fine because it was the first time for him.
Hmm.
I look outside the window and there's an old high rise across from the window. And I was like, oh, look, Jamie, it had a fire, but it was like, I don't know, it was just a really decrepit looking building, and the top like 4 or 5 floors were burned out, like just charred.
Hmm.
And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was interesting at the time. But again, in hindsight, I feel like Spirit was physically showing me the tower the night of the tower for me, which
Hmm.
was really interesting,
Yeah.
to have that physical
Yeah, for
thing.
sure.
Um, yeah, and then that night, I just had extremely, when he was in surgery, because the surgery went from 5 p.m. to like 4 a.m. because they're
Hmm.
having trouble. I was just having loud voices and knowings. Like I um I knew it was them talking to me, and they're saying, "This is happening. Like this is right. You don't have a choice. This is all you're." Anyway, um, yeah, just telling me what was happening, and I believed them, and I felt reassured by them, even though I was in a very difficult emotional state.
Hmm.
And then he ended up visiting me. I was half asleep, half awake because I was waiting for a phone call from the doctor. And all of a sudden, I just felt a presence in the room, and I felt someone grab my hand. I didn't open my eyes, and I just said with my mind, Jamie, if that's you, I need you to hold on. And I found out the next morning that he had, in fact, died at that moment, but they put him on life support right after.
Wow.
And so he ended up, being on life support for about a week further than that. Um, and the night before he permanently died, he came to me in a vision. So I was sleeping for this one, but it was different. It was definitely a vision.
Yeah.
Um, and it was like I was in his body, and I saw what it was like to be attached to all these tubes, and he was telling me without words, but with a feeling that he wanted to go, and that, like, to know that this was okay. And the next morning they asked me if they could take him off life support. So it just felt like totally comfortable with saying yes, because he had come to me and communicated, and and yeah, that made it a lot
Wow.
easier.
Yeah. What, I mean, first of all, Brooke, just thank you for sharing this story, because you have to be incredibly brave to share this story with everybody. But it's such a powerful one. And as soon as I heard your voice note, I knew how important it would be for other people to hear it. So thank you for sharing that with everyone. Now, of course, it's easy for me in a state of love and light and fairy lights and prettiness to say, well, spirit revisiting you. But what's your feelings about spirit now? What are your feelings about the apparition that you saw crawling? Have you had apparitions since?
I have I have had apparitions since, and they've actually always been Jamie since, and which has been nice because he's really shown me that it's all good, and he's totally fine.
Good.
Yeah, and he'll send me the smell of toast as well because he was obsessed with making himself toast.
I love it.
Yeah. But I haven't seen any like stranger apparitions since. I talked to the one crawling out of the floor with
Mhm.
that family friend that is a medium, and she said she thought that wasn't a spirit. She thought that was a vision of change. coming, and I was terrified to see it. So
Yeah.
that's her interpretation she gave me. So that made me feel better. But honestly, I'm in a good place with my connection to spirit, in the sense that I really have zero fear. Again, large thanks to you and your podcast for that, which
Oh, good.
changed my experience with it all. But yeah, also similar to, you know, a lot of the conversations you've been having this season about how it ebbs and flows. I've struggled in the last couple of years with, why was it so loud and then nothing? Like, how do I control this? But I've been practicing. So now I personally do not know how to talk to spirit on demand, but they do come in when they want to come in and give me a subtle message. And what I've learned recently is to just accept it and just receive it. Because before I was like, what does this mean? And try to figure it out, and I'd be wrong.
Yeah.
I'd always get the wrong interpretation. So now I'm just like, okay, received, and not going to do anything about it unless I have to.
I think even for me, as you've probably heard me say in the podcast this season, when the two times that spirit have really made themselves known to me, for other people, but also, you know, when I've had visitations from my loved ones, when I've not been seeking it, it's always felt much stronger than as soon as I try to do it for somebody else. It is like, boom, boom, is this thing on? Is there anything there? But it still is. And I know, Brooke, that because you've experienced it in such a strong way, because of the need there's no doubt in my mind, spirit world pulled out all the stops because they needed you to know that it was going to be okay. They needed you to know this was coming, you know, and maybe you didn't quite get it in the moment, but it will have done something to your energy to prepare you. They're very intelligent. They know how it's going to work. But also for you to be able to see Jamie and know that he is still with you and okay is incredible. When you go to do it for somebody else, it does feel much, much more subtle, and almost like you could be making it up, almost like there's nothing there. So just feel into that, because I know you have the ability, because you've had it so strongly. So it's just that it probably doesn't feel as strong now. So you're doubting it, but it is absolutely there. Wow.
Yeah. If I may too, the funny one was, I'm currently trying to sell my house.
Oh yeah.
And last week, I had an offer. I didn't love it, but it was okay. And Spirit came in with, I just knew it was them. It wasn't a doubt. And they came in and they said, like, don't take that deal. And so I'm like feeling funny about it. And I listened to them. And now I'm like, I look like a crazy person, like just listening to this voice in my head, not taking all this money because some random voice told me not to. So I hope it works out, but I am trying to just listen to them.
I'm sure it will. And, you know, the number of times that I have thought, my God, the men in white coats are just around the corner for me. But then when it all makes sense, when it all pans out, you look back and go, well, of course. So you have to allow yourself that absolutely freaky vulnerability to be in that space. So because obviously you've lost very young, you've lost your husband, your son, has lost their dad, and everything that you've been going through with that. What is your take on, you know, the spirit world, the journey, life? What's it all about?
Yeah, I definitely view it differently now. I view it with more acceptance and peace. It's funny too, to meet people, or people in my life, you see them struggling with things that, you know, they're so stressed about. I don't know, someone was mean to them.
Yeah.
So now I'm just like, you know, that was a lesson, or, you know, that's not something you should dwell on. But I've also learned to stay in my own lane. Like, we all have our own journeys, and so it's made me approach life with a lot more acceptance. But it's also made me a lot less motivated, because I used to be so career driven, and now I'm just like, you know, there's more important things. And
yeah, there's more to life than the grind and the hustle.
Yeah.
For sure. And what an amazing thing for you, just to know that he is with you and okay. That is I'm so glad that he was able to show you. I'm so glad that your gifts work in that way, that you can have that irrefutable evidence of him being present with you. Is just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm
Thank
really
you. Thank you for sharing your story. It really is an incredible, heart-wrenching, but beautiful story to hear. And I'm very, very grateful. And I've got to touch quickly here on the spirit world using your dog like a puppet.
Yeah.
And, we're going to get you the message, but this is how we're going to do it. I mean, that's pretty full on.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
I've had her do one other thing as well. I was talking to that family friend,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, Jamie's been tapping on the pipes. Have you noticed? And I said, no. And then one night she kicked me she was sleeping in my bed, and she kicked me really hard in the ribs. And I opened my eyes and I saw above her like a glowing blue paw print. It was almost like her spirit symbol. And I was like, that was weird. And then I heard tapping on the pipes, and she wanted to wake me up to hear it.
Amazing.
Yeah. So.
Oh, that is so cool. I love it. How absolutely incredible, and how wonderful your gifts work. I wish mine worked like that. It's so fantastic. So thank you very much for sharing your story with us. I'm sure the other listeners are really grateful.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, what a story, eh? And so amazingly brave of Brooke to share it with us. She's been through so much, and it's wonderful that she's willing to help other people understand, learn and grow from her experiences. If you've had an experience with spirit that you are now feeling people might like to hear, you can, as I said, voice note it to the show by just clicking the WhatsApp link in the show notes, or you can email it over if you don't want your voice featured. I would love to share some more of these. But also, have you got a take on Brooke or Laura's stories? Have you got an idea about what it was, a suggestion about why it worked out the way it did? Any thoughts, anything? I'd love your interpretations. I'd love your ideas about it. So if you've got anything to add, you can submit that the same way, WhatsApp or emailing the podcast. And thank you all for listening. I will speak to you on Thursday when we've got more listener questions. Have a great day.